Imagine being put to death simply because a house you built collapsed. Or consider a society where killing a cat, even by accident, could mean your own life was forfeit. And picture this: if you couldn't pay your debts, your creditors might have been legally entitled to carve up your body and divide the pieces. Though some scholars now think this meant dividing your assets instead. Ancient civilizations had rules that can seem utterly baffling and sometimes terrifying to us today. Number 15. Forbidden garments. No cross-dressing allowed. In the ancient Near East, specifically among the Israelites as recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, there existed a clear and firm prohibition against what we might today call cross-dressing. The law found in Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 5 stated, "A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God." This wasn't merely a suggestion about fashion or social etiquette. It was framed as a divine commandment, and transgressing it was considered a serious offense, an abomination. The societies of the ancient Near East often placed strong emphasis on distinct social roles for men and women, and clothing was a primary visual marker of these roles. Maintaining these distinctions was seen as crucial for social order and religious purity. The specific punishments for violating this law aren't explicitly detailed in the same verse, but the term abomination typically signified actions that were deeply offensive to the divine and could bring severe consequences or divine displeasure upon the individual or the community. This particular law reflects a broader concern in many ancient cultures about maintaining clear boundaries, not just between genders but also between the sacred and the profane, the pure and the impure, and even between humans and animals or different species. These boundaries were often seen as integral to the cosmic order established by the gods or by a single creator god. Number 14. Beehive blues. Mess with bees, pay the price. The Hittites, an ancient Anatolian people who flourished from around 1600 to 1178 BCE, had a remarkably detailed law code, and within it, they even addressed the theft of beehives. Honey was an incredibly valuable commodity in the ancient world. It was one of the very few sweeteners available, and it also had medicinal uses and was used in religious rituals. Beeswax, too, was important for writing tablets, sealing, and casting. According to Hittite Law Tablet 1 specifically, laws Sneedy 1 and Sneedy 2, the penalties for stealing bees were quite specific. If someone stole a swarm of bees from a hive that was still on its stand, the penalty was a fine of 6 shekels of silver. However, if the hive was empty because the bees had flown away or perished before the theft, the fine was reduced to 3 shekels of silver. There was also a distinction made for the theft of bees from a wild colony, which incurred a smaller fine. These laws show how seriously the Hittites took the protection of this valuable resource. The laws didn't just cover theft. They also considered the consequences if the bees themselves died. If someone was found to have caused the death of a swarm of bees, perhaps through neglect or malicious action, after stealing them, additional penalties would likely apply related to the destruction of valuable property. The Hittite legal system was known for its preference for restitution and fines over corporal punishment for many offenses, unlike some of its Mesopotamian neighbors. And these bee-related laws are a good example of this principle in action, assigning monetary values to even these small but vital creatures and their produce. Number 13. The risky accusation. Point a finger. Face the same fate. In ancient Babylon, under the famous Code of Hammurabi, which dates back to about 1754 BC, making an accusation against someone was a very serious business, with potentially lethal consequences for the accuser if they couldn't prove their case. Law 1 of Hammurabi's code states, If a man accuses another man and charges him with a capital crime, but cannot prove it, the accuser shall be put to death. This principle extended to other serious, though not necessarily capital accusations as well. If the river proves that man to be innocent, and he comes forth safe, he who charged him with witchcraft shall be put to death. He who jumped into the river shall take possession of the house of his accuser. This method of trial by ordeal, where the accused was subjected to a dangerous test, like being thrown into a river, which was believed to be under the purview of a river god who would determine guilt or innocence, was a feature of this legal system. The severe penalty for false accusation was likely intended to deter frivolous or malicious claims, ensuring that people thought very carefully before leveling serious charges. Underscored the gravity of justice and the potential for words to destroy lives. This legal philosophy placed a heavy burden of proof on the accuser, and the threat of receiving the very punishment they sought for another served as a powerful disincentive against bearing false witness in Babylonian society. Number 12. Athens' extreme cancel culture ostracism for 10 years. Ancient Athens, often celebrated as the birthplace of democracy, had a peculiar political tool known as ostracism, introduced in the late 6th or early 5th century BCE. This wasn't a punishment for a specific crime, but rather a way for the citizens to preemptively remove an individual deemed too powerful, too ambitious, or a potential threat to the stability of the state. Once a year, the Athenian assembly, the ecclesia, could decide if they wanted to hold an ostracism. If they voted yes, a special day was set. Citizens would then scratch the name of the person they wished to exile onto a potsherd, called an ostracon, from which the term ostracism derives. These ostraca were collected, and if a minimum of 6,000 votes were cast in total, the individual who received the most votes was banished from Athens for a period of 10 years. They didn't lose their property, nor were they considered criminals in the traditional sense. Their citizenship rights were merely suspended. Upon their return after a decade, they could in theory resume their lives and even their political careers. Famous Athenian statesmen like Themistocles, Aristides, and Cimon were all victims of ostracism at various points. The process was intended as a safeguard for democracy, a way to diffuse political tensions and prevent any single person from accumulating enough power to become a tyrant. However, it could also be used as a tool in political rivalries, allowing factions to remove prominent opponents. It was a unique form of political exile, based purely on popular vote, without trial or specific charges being necessary, reflecting the Athenian anxiety about tyranny and their commitment to popular sovereignty, even if it meant sending prominent citizens away for a long time based on public opinion. Number 11. Sparta's toughest baby critics. Survival of the fittest, literally. In the rigid militaristic society of ancient Sparta, located in Laconia in the Peloponnese, the fate of a newborn infant was not solely in the hands of its parents, according to historical accounts, most notably from the biographer Plutarch, who wrote centuries later but drew on earlier sources. Spartan law dictated that newborn male infants were to be inspected by the elders of the Gerousia, the Spartan Council of Elders. The baby would be brought before these elders, who would examine it for physical fitness and signs of robust health. If the child was deemed strong and well-formed, it was ordered to be raised. However, if the infant was found to be weak, sickly, or deformed, the elders would order it to be exposed, left to die, at a chasm near Mount Taygetus, known as the Apophethei, or place of rejection. This practice was rooted in the Spartan belief that only strong individuals were of value to the state. Sparta was a society perpetually geared for war, and every male citizen was expected to become a formidable hoplite soldier. A child who was not physically capable of undergoing the rigorous Spartan training, the ago, and becoming an effective warrior was considered a burden rather than an asset. While the archaeological evidence for a mass deposit of infant bones at the specific site of Apophatae is debated by modern scholars, the historical accounts of the practice of infant exposure for perceived weakness are quite consistent. This stark law underscored the Spartan state's extreme emphasis on military prowess, collective well-being over individual sentiment, and the eugenic-like desire to cultivate a citizenry composed only of the physically capable, shaping one of the most formidable and feared military forces in the ancient world. Number 10. Animal attraction. Taboos Hittite laws on bestiality. The Hittites, who established a powerful empire in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, during the Bronze Age, had a comprehensive legal code that addressed a wide array of social issues, including some rather specific and to modernize peculiar sexual offenses. Among these were laws concerning bestiality, or sexual relations between humans and animals. What makes the Hittite approach particularly noteworthy is the detailed distinctions they made based on the species of animal involved, and sometimes even the status of the human perpetrator. For example, Hittite Law 187 stated that if a man had sexual relations with a cow, it was a capital offense, meaning he would be put to death. Similarly, relations with a sheep were also a capital crime, Psalm 188. However, if a man engaged in such acts with a horse or a mule, the law was different. SS 200A stipulated that this was not a capital offense, but the man would be barred from becoming a priest and could not approach the king or be presented befilement rather than an immediate death sentence. There were also laws, Psalm 199, that dealt with relations with pigs or dogs, which also appear to have been capital offenses. Interestingly, some versions of the laws suggest that the king was considered to be above these particular prohibitions, or at least that the usual rules did not apply to him in the same way. These laws highlight the Hittite concern with ritual purity, social order, and the perceived natural order of things. Certain animals may have had specific religious or symbolic significance that made relations with them particularly heinous, while others, though still forbidden, incurred different types of penalties. Number 9. Sing a mean song. Face the music Roman law on slanderous chants. In the early days of the Roman Republic, around 451 to 450 BCE, the foundational legal code known as the 12 Cables was compiled. This code covered a wide range of civil and criminal matters, and among its provisions was a surprisingly harsh penalty for what we might consider a form of defamation or slander, specifically through the composition and public performance of insulting or libelous songs. According to later Roman writers like Cicero and Horace, who commented on these ancient laws, the 12 Quables prescribed a severe punishment, possibly even the death penalty, or at least a beating so severe it could lead to death, known as fustuarium, for anyone who composed and sang a malum carmen, an evil or magical song. This law reflects a society where public reputation and honor, dignitas, were of paramount importance. Persons standing in the community could be severely damaged by public ridicule or accusations, and such songs were seen as a potent weapon. Furthermore, there was a common belief in the ancient world in the power of words, incantations, and curses. An evil song might not just have been seen as insulting, but potentially as a form of harmful magic or curse intended to bring actual misfortune upon its target. The severity of the punishment becues how seriously the early Romans took verbal attacks on character and the potential for such acts to disrupt social harmony. While the death penalty for singing a mean song seems extreme, it highlights a deep-seated concern for protecting personal honor and perhaps a lingering fear of the perceived magical power of defamatory incantations in early Roman society. Number 8. Death by cabbage, draconian justice in Athens. Long before Athens became known for its sophisticated democracy and philosophy, it was governed by a set of laws so harsh that their author's name became synonymous with extreme severity. Draco. Around 621 BC, Draco was appointed to codify the laws of Athens, which, until then, had largely been unwritten and subject to arbitrary interpretation, often leading to blood feuds. While Draco's laws covered various offenses, they became infamous for one particular characteristic: the widespread application of the death penalty. According to later Greek writers like Plutarch, Draco's laws prescribed death for a vast range of crimes, from murder and treason down to seemingly minor offenses. It was said that when Draco was asked why he had fixed the punishment of death for most offenses, he replied that he considered small offenses to deserve death, and he knew of no greater penalty for great ones. One of the most cited examples of the extremity of draconian law, perhaps an exaggeration to emphasize its harshness but widely reported, was that even stealing an apple or a cabbage was punishable by death. Whether this specific detail is literally true or a later embellishment, the overall reputation of Draco's code was one of uncompromising and brutal justice. The intention behind such severity might have been to firmly establish state control over justice, to suppress private vendettas, and to create a clear, albeit unforgiving, legal framework. While Draco's laws on homicide were considered more sophisticated and were retained for longer, the extreme harshness of many of his other penalties eventually led to widespread discontent, paving the way for the reforms of Solon a few decades later, who repealed most of Draco's laws, except those concerning murder. Number 7. Father knows best, or else the power of paterfamilias in Rome. One of the most striking and fundamental aspects of ancient Roman law and society was the concept of patria potestas, which translates to the power of a father. This doctrine granted the paterfamilias, the oldest living male ascendant, typically the father or grandfather, extraordinary and lifelong legal authority over his descendants, both male and female, as well as his wife, if she was married in manu, a form of marriage that transferred her from her father's authority to her husband's or his father's. This power was remarkably extensive. Legally, the paterfamilias owned all property acquired by members of his household. His adult sons, even if married and with their own children, could not own property independently as long as their paterfamilias was alive. But the power extended far beyond mere property rights. Paterfamilias had the ius zite nekisk, the power of life and death over his children. This meant he could, in theory, order a child to be exposed at birth, left to die, sell them into slavery, though this became restricted over time, or even, in extreme cases of misconduct, put an adult child to death. While the actual execution of adult children by their fathers was likely rare, especially in later periods, and subject to social condemnation if deemed unjust, the legal right remained for a significant portion of Roman history. He also arranged their marriages, could compel them to divorce, and had to formally emancipate them for them to become legally independent, which usually only happened upon his death. This immense authority shaped Roman family structure, social hierarchy, and individual identity for centuries, emphasizing lineage, duty, and the absolute authority of the head of the household. Number 6. Don't water down the drinks, a barmaid's watery grave. The Code of Hammurabi, from ancient Babylon around 1754 BCE, is one of the oldest deciphered lengthy writings in the world, and it provides fascinating insights into the laws and social norms of Mesopotamian society. Among its 282 laws, several deal with commerce and fair trade, and one in particular lays down a very severe punishment for dishonest practices in the sale of alcohol. Law 108 of the Code specifically targets female tavern keepers or barmaids who engaged in fraudulent activities. It states, if a female tavern keeper does not accept grain according to gross weight in payment of drink, but takes money, and the price of the drink is less than the price of the grain, she shall be convicted and thrown into the water. Essentially, this law addresses a situation where a barmaid might overcharge for beer, a staple drink in Mesopotamia, often made from grain, or manipulate the exchange rate between grain, a common form of payment, and silver money to her advantage. Punishment prescribed, being thrown into the water, is generally interpreted as death by drowning. This was a form of ordeal or direct execution. This harsh penalty caused the importance of fair dealing in commercial transactions in Babylonian society. Beer was not just a beverage but a fundamental part of the daily diet and wages for laborers, so ensuring its honest sale was crucial. The law also reflects the social roles of women, as tavern keeping was one of the professions open to them, but it also subjected them to strict regulations and severe consequences for transgressions within that role. The severity also suggests a desire to maintain quality control and prevent social unrest that could arise from the exploitation of common people in such essential transactions. Number 5. Buried alive for broken vows. The fate of Rome's Vestal Virgins. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins held a unique and highly revered position. They were priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and family, and their primary duty was to maintain the sacred fire in her temple, a flame believed to be essential for the safety and continuity of Rome. Selected as young girls, typically between the ages of 6 and 10, from patrician families, they took a vow of chastity for their 30 years of service. This vow of incestum, unchastity, was considered absolutely critical. If a Vestal virgin broke her vow and engaged in sexual relations, it was deemed a profound religious pollution, a sacrilege that could bring divine wrath upon the entire city of Rome. The punishment for a Vestal found guilty of incestum was horrifying. She was to be buried alive, because her body was sacred and could not be violated by normal means of execution, and because spilling her blood was considered unlucky. This method was devised. Condemned Vestal would be dressed in funereal attire, carried in a closed litter, as if already dead, through silent mourning crowds to a place called the Campus Saleratus, the evil field. There, an underground chamber was prepared, containing a small couch, a lamp, and meager provisions of food and water. Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, would utter a prayer, and the Vestal would then descend into the chamber, which was then sealed, leaving her to perish in the darkness. Her male partner in the affair, if identified, would be flogged to death in public. This extreme penalty reflected the immense symbolic importance of the Vestal's purity for the perceived well-being and divine favor of the Roman state. Number 4. The price of a nose, Hittite compensation for biting. The Hittite civilization, flourishing in Anatolia, modern Turkey, from roughly 1600 to 1178 BC, left behind a fascinating collection of laws that often favored monetary compensation or restitution over purely retributive justice like an eye for an eye. Their legal code inscribed on cuneiform tablets details specific fines for a variety of injuries, and some of these are quite precise about the body part affected. One particularly vivid example can be found in Laws 13 of the Hittite laws, Tablet I. It states, "If anyone bites off the nose of a free man, he shall give 1 mina of silver." A mina was a significant amount of silver, a substantial penalty for such an injury. The laws also differentiated based on the social status of the victim. If the victim was a slave, the compensation for a bitten-off nose was less typically half the amount. If anyone bites off the nose of a slave or a female slave, he shall give 30 shekels of silver, and he looks to his house for it, meaning the master of the slave received the compensation. There were also laws detailing compensation for other injuries, like a broken tooth, a damaged ear, or a broken limb, each with its own specified silver value. This system of fixed fines for specific injuries aimed to prevent escalating blood feuds between families by providing a standardized and legally sanctioned way to resolve personal injury disputes. It reflects a society that, while certainly capable of harshness, also sought practical solutions and a degree of proportionality in its justice, valuing compensation and the restoration of social balance, at least among its free citizens, over purely punitive measures for many non-capital offenses. Number 3. Feline fatality. Harm a cat. Face your doom in Egypt. In ancient Egypt, cats held a remarkably exalted status, far beyond being mere household pets. They were deeply intertwined with religious beliefs, particularly associated with the goddess Beste, who was often depicted with the head of a lioness or a domestic cat, and was the goddess of home, fertility, childbirth, and protection against evil spirits and disease. Consequently, cats were considered sacred, and harming or killing one even accidentally was an extremely serious offense, often punishable by death. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the Egyptians' reverence for cats, noting that if a house caught fire, the Egyptians were more concerned about rescuing the cats than putting out the blaze. He also recounted an incident where a Roman soldier who accidentally killed a cat was mobbed and killed by an angry crowd despite official attempts to intervene. Diodorus Siculus, another Greek historian from the 1st century BCE, also reported that the intentional killing of a cat was a capital crime, and even the accidental killing could lead to severe punishment, sometimes death depending on the circumstances and public outcry. When a household cat died of natural causes, the family members would mourn by shaving their eyebrows as a sign of grief. Deceased cats were often mummified with the same care as humans, sometimes elaborately, and buried in special cat cemeteries. Thousands of mummified cats have been discovered by archaeologists, testament to their sacred status. This profound veneration stemmed from their perceived protective qualities and their association with a powerful deity, making any harm to them a sacrilege against the divine order. Number 2. Debtors, beware. A pound of flesh, Roman style. One of the most chilling and debated laws from ancient Rome comes from the 12 Cables, the foundational Roman law code dating to around 451 to 450 BC. Table III dealt with debt, and it outlined a harsh process for creditors dealing with defaulting debtors. If a debtor failed to pay after a judgment, they could be arrested and imprisoned by the creditor. After 60 days, if the debt remained unpaid and no one came forward to settle it on the debtor's behalf, the law appeared to offer a grim recourse. According to some interpretations of the text, particularly by later Roman commentators like Aulus Gellius, if there were multiple creditors, they were legally entitled to cut the debtor's body into pieces, partes, sequento, and divide them. The law even specified that if a creditor cut more or less than their due share, they would incur no penalty. Usi plus minus sequunt, ne fraud esto. This visceral image of dismemberment has understandably caused much debate among historians. Many modern scholars argue that the phrase partus sequunto should be interpreted metaphorically, suggesting that the creditors were to divide the debtor's assets or estate, not their physical body. Others maintain that in the context of early, rather brutal Roman justice, a literal interpretation, however shocking, might have been intended, at least in theory, even if rarely or never actually carried out. The very ambiguity and the gruesome possibility it presents make it one of the most bizarre and talked about provisions of ancient Roman law, whether literal or metaphorical. It certainly conveyed the extreme seriousness with which debts were regarded and the severe consequences faced by those who failed to meet their financial obligations in the early Roman Republic. Number 1. If the house falls, so does the builder. Hammurabi's lethal liability. At the very top of our list, for its stark and direct form of retributive justice is a law from the famous Code of Hammurabi of Babylon, dating to circa 1754 BCE. This ancient Mesopotamian legal code was remarkably comprehensive, and among its provisions were those dealing with professional responsibility, none more striking than the laws concerning builders. Law 229 of the Code of Hammurabi states, "If a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built falls in and kills its owner, then that builder shall be put to death." This is a dramatic example of the principle of lex talionis, or an eye for an eye, applied with chilling precision. The responsibility for shoddy workmanship, leading to a fatality, fell squarely and fatally on the builder. Code didn't stop there. It extended this principle to other members of the owner's family. Law 230 continues, "If it kills the son of the owner, then the son of that builder shall be put to death." This concept of vicarious liability, where a builder's negligence that resulted in the death of the owner's child, is profoundly alien to modern legal thought, but was a feature of Hammurabi's system. There were further provisions for lesser damages. If the collapse caused the death of a slave of the owner, the builder had to provide a slave of equal value to the owner. Law 231. If it destroyed goods, the builder had to restore whatever was destroyed and also rebuild the house properly at his own expense, because he did not make the house he built strong. These laws undoubtedly aimed to ensure high standards of construction in a society where urban living was common, acting as a powerful if terrifying deterrent against negligence in the building trade.